Species spicy, take four. 1, 2, 3, 4. Beat eight, ta ta dee ta do. Rap bap 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 bap. Nee na no na 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 na. I mean, any kind of mystery science theater reference, just by dint of it being a mystery science theater reference, is going to be obscure. But when you reference the blooper reel, well, then I think you're in a whole new area of being annoying. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this television show with a very modest budget. um, this is I'm sorry I'm late, but traffic and all. I tried to do this morning at the comic book store, and it ended up being like 40 minutes long, and but then it also had no sound, and so I went against the advice of my management and decided to not post it. So I'll tell you this much though, and this is something that I need to have on the record. There was that. There was just a tiny snafu with the mail that was certain to set me off. Got that under control. Everything's fine. Big smiles. Everybody's happy. All right. What did I do first? So, like, in my head, I'm going to be like, don't repeat yourself. Repeat myself. Who the fuck heard me the first time? Swear in the woods, too. First up, Packlist number 6, only 4.5 years later. This is an anthology series by the great Dustin Weaver, who was first made known to me back about 10 years ago ish. Maybe 2014 or 15 even. But my good friend Frank Giuliano, who was one of the 3 owners that I worked for at San Diego Comics. The only one that I'm still friends with. Hey Frank, if you're watching. Yeah, number 5 came out 50 months ago. My boss, my current boss, said to me 3 to 4 times. He even 5 months, like I didn't hear him the first 3 times. I'm sure he also said literally, the word literally twice before each time, and then once more afterwards. I'm going to be using the word literally properly here. My boss uses the word literally a million times a day. How many times correctly? You don't want to know. Anyway, sidebar. First sidebar out of the way. Dustin Weaver, the first thing I remember him doing, the thing Frank showed me, I think, was a book called Shield, which was a Marvel comic written by Jonathan Hickman. And this was back when Hickman was kind of king shit at the time. You know, his books were selling well enough that Marvel was like, here's the keys, you can pretty much do what you want. So Shield, not an acronym, but a deep dive history into ancient history of the organization, which is not just, does not just go back to the 60s, as it turns out. But it was really good. It was great art. And gosh, I want to say he did. I think he's one of these guys, though, that kind of takes a while to finish stuff. And I'm absolutely certain, because this is the first comic I've seen him do in years. In fact, I was just thinking not that long ago, like, man, I haven't seen Dustin Weaver do anything in a while. I hope the animation job he has is, paying well. I hope he has medical insurance and all that stuff. Because I don't think he's like Quietly or somebody like that, where he's just painstakingly or I never remember his fucking name. The guy who did Hard Boiled. Dave? I keep wanting to say Gibbons, but that's not right. That's the guy who did Watchmen. It'll come back to me. But I do think he comics are not his main thing. I wouldn't imagine. As I'm sure I've mentioned, comics is a terrible paying industry for the talent. So anyway, I can't imagine it makes a lot of money for editorial either, though. But they probably have insurance. This is part 2 of this story. I don't remember the last issue. I think I have it here with me because I think it came out after I moved to Los Angeles. But it's even so, it would still be buried under the mountain of books that I've amassed in just the last 6 years alone. So, but this was see if I can't crystallize my thoughts. I will say, as upset as I was after I spent all that time blathering about comic books this morning, only to have my efforts frustrated, it did kind of feel a little bit like, I'm going to make a very white person analogy, but that episode of The Office where Michael would answer the phone, Jen Livingston, I presume, and Pam would go, "It's still me," and he'd go, "Oh, sorry," and then she would put her through it. He goes, "Hey, Pam," or "Hey, Jan, how you doing?" So this is my "Hey, Jan, how you doing?" It would have used to really bother me to not have the first 5 issues kind of fresh in my mind. I mean, and I guess I could look at the library. Maybe they have a trade paperback or something that I could catch up with. But I also feel like when I was very young, when I was 11 years old and I started collecting funny books, I obviously wasn't able to just go out and buy, a couple thousand. I had to kind of slowly build my collection. And so therefore I was reading a lot of stuff I didn't know what had gone on before. And back in those days, especially with superhero comics, they tried to make it as easy on you as they could, but it still drove me nuts, not actually knowing. And then when I started working at a comic shop in my 20s when I was in college, uh, and where I stayed for the next 15 years, um, then I had access to everything. So I didn't have to like hunt stuff down. I still would occasionally, but generally speaking, and plus also the trade paperback collections are just a standard at this point. They used to be, like kind of a big deal because nobody really wanted old shit back in the 80s, or so they thought anyway. That's all. No. So then fast forward to now, and so yeah, for a while since I had it all at my fingertips, I wouldn't read anything unless I had the whole stack. I think I kind of broke myself of that over the last few years. Like I want to say it was 2019. I put my hands to a complete run of Punisher 2099, which is an awful, awful comic book, but I love it because it's the 90s and it's bad. And I had so the whole stack and it's like 20 some issues, and I was like, I had a whole afternoon. I'm gonna read Punisher 2099, and I got like 9 issues in. I went, this is I can't do this. Like trying to pound a fucking thing of Clorox. I gotta have a break in between, or a chaser at the very least. So now I kind of, and I also like, I guess going back and reading more stuff from the 80s and 90s as I have been the last few years, and remembering how, or not remembering, but just kind of realizing that I know how to read. And if a creator is even halfway decent at their job, they'll be able to fill you in on whatever exposition you need to know. And then if they don't, you still have pretty pictures to look at. I read tons of stuff. No fucking idea what's going on. Who cares? It's a comic. So I mean, I would like to go back and read these just because I haven't in a long time. But I'm just going to go ahead and read this right now because I'm very excited to read that again. I don't. I to be honest, I don't remember what packless actually means. This is uh, obviously this is like a western, but I seem to recall most of the stories being like more sci-fi, which and this I think having an anthology is kind of like he's into heavy metal, that sort of thing, the magazine, not the music. Although he could be into the music too, for all I know. Also, this week, wait, okay, this is the one I kind of went on. So sorry, I need to stop saying that out loud. I also Terror War #1. This is my pick for the shop as well. This is written by Saladin Ahmed, who is a writer that I quite like, but not without. There's an asterisk there. So standard procedure, and it should come as no surprise to anybody. When you have a new writer, you throw them a book there's not a lot of risk. If it tanks, it was probably going to get canceled soon anyway. Or if it's like I guess nowadays, because it seems to me like they kind of just plan for these books to get canceled right away. So take a property like say the Exiles, which is uh, kind of like the Defenders but multi-dimensional. They're a team of characters from different dimensions, so they're like alternate histories. So when Saladin Ahmed wrote the Exiles, which I believe was volume 4, he had like a post-apocalyptic Kamala Khan who's all old and bitter and a hard uh, bitten fighter. Is that the word I want? And Captain Carter, not Captain America, but Peggy Carter is, I guess, Captain Britain would make more sense. And like like a little cartoony Wolverine, like that sort of thing. And that's the sort of shit I love in general. And these are the books that I enjoy the most. Like uh, Strike Force by Teeny Howard was another one that I knew wasn't going to last, but it was like the first team the Son of Satan had been on in years since the Defenders or Midnight Suns at the very least. A lot of books like that. And this goes back to the late '80s when the sort of British wave of Vertigo writers were coming over. When Alan Moore started writing for DC because he had been a big deal over in the UK, DC was like, well, we'll give him Swamp Thing. And again, if it tanks, we're probably going to cancel it pretty soon anyway. And then it ended up becoming a huge smash because, as it turns out, Alan Moore is a genius. And they did the same thing with all those Vertigo books. Sandman was an old Golden Age character. Neil Gaiman's version was very far removed. But I mean, at first it was still, he was careful to kind of make reference back to the original Sandman. Doom Patrol by Grant Morrison, as well as Animal Man by Grant Morrison. These were characters that nobody gave a fuck about anymore. So they're like, give them to the new limey guys, and we'll see what. And then they all went completely. So I think that still might be in the back of the minds of editorial these days. Is like, let's not call it a limited series, although it's extremely going to be a limited series. Because if it takes off, then we have a sleeper hit on our hands. So when Saladin Ahmed was kind of new at Marvel, he did do Exiles eventually, but one of the first books he did was Black Bolt, and that ended up being one of my favorite comics of that year. I guess that would have been like 2016, 2017. Uh, this was back when Marvel was trying to replace the X-Men with the Inhumans. And I don't know if I've gone on this long rant. I don't feel like doing it twice in one day. Yes, I do. Back when, before Disney bought Fox, and they couldn't get their hands on the X Men to make movies, they were like, "Why we can kind of shove the X Men out of the way, wave our magic wands, and have everyone, or not everyone, but like a third of the population of Earth become inhuman, and then they're the ones who have to fight for a world that hates and fears them, and we can just kind of we can." I mean, I'm sure they were still publishing the X Men all the time. The franchise is too popular, but they really wanted the Inhumans to take more of that. Uh, they wanted the Inhumans just to be in the Marvel universe more. They had a show planned around them that bombed. I went and saw it in the. This would have been Memorial Day weekend, I think, maybe even Labor Day weekend. It was a summer holiday weekend in 2017, and I was living in a place that had no air conditioning. So I went to the movies like 9 times that weekend. And one of the things that they were showing at the Burbank AMC, the hour and a half pilot episode of the Inhumans show. And I said, sure. And it was goofy as fuck. I even rewatched it on the old Disney Plus not that long ago. Still super goofy. I still like it. I like goofy shit. And honestly, the goofier side of the MCU is kind of more interesting to me at this point. I've seen how good it can get. I watched Moon Knight. I loved Werewolf by Night. I like She Hulk, but I haven't finished yet. And same with Loki, but give me the Inhumans, man, because it's stupid. And they do stupid things like, they shaved Medusa's head. I'm like, that's her whole power set. I don't care though. It's not. That's the thing is like I'm not going to get mad that they're doing it wrong. In fact, I kind of want to see how they're doing it wrong, and just how wrong it is. But then that didn't really take, obviously. So then they had given the Inhumans 2 monthly titles, which they never had had. They'd had one monthly title, I believe, in the '70s when Kirby was still on board. I think, in fact, I could be mistaken on that. And now all of a sudden they have 2 monthly titles, which I read at least most of them. Because James Asmus wrote one, I think Charles Soule wrote the other, and they weren't new, but they were newish. And then, yeah, a few years goes by and nobody's buying the Inhumans, and I don't remember how. I think Ms. Marvel was the one. Uh, Kamala Khan, speaking of which, was the one exception to that. She was a new character who wasn't human, but she became a big hit. And largely, I would say, because G. Willow Wilson, who wrote that, created that character and wrote that book, was just really, really good at it. I'll get into that in a second. I want to say there was like another. I think it was, yeah. There was a big crossover called X Men versus Inhumans, as there had been Avengers versus X Men a few years previous, and then that kind of put pay to all this bullshit. And at the end of all that, Black Bolt, who is the leader of the Inhumans, he's their king. Blackagar Boltagon is his birth name, obviously. Old old field goal head, whatever the. He's got like uprights on his. Anyway, uh, he was found guilty by some sort of tribunal. Or no, that's I got that wrong again. Maximus the Mad, who is his brother and who is like his Loki. Uh, he was the one who was put on trial for crimes against inhumanity, and but he pulled a switcheroo somehow, and Black Bolt ended up going to prison. So then the Black Bolt series that Saladin Ahmed wrote was a prison book, and then it ended up being a team book. And so like he teamed up with the Absorbing Man and a couple other characters that I can't remember were kind of off. And I love the Absorbing Man. That was a character that I could never get enough of. And there was an issue in particular. I want to say it was either issue 6 or issue 8, and there was a great because Absorbing Man's always been a very two-dimensional character. He's a big bald idiot. He's like a former wrestler, Crusher Creel, who has a wrecking ball that he throws around, and he can also turn into any element that he touches. He touches concrete, he becomes concrete, steel, blah blah blah. He touches rubber, he becomes me on a Friday night, folks. Come on, I laughed when you walked in. Um, but he's talking about yeah, they gave him like a whole issue, and so it really kind of added some depth to his character because now he's kind of like you're supposed to feel. And the Absorbing Man and Titania have been a thing since time out of mind, and so he's talking about her, and he's being very like tender and warm about it. And Christian Ward, who was the artist on this book, incredible artist, is a splash page of Titania. And it's like hearts and stuff, and it was very romantic. And then she's also kicking She-Hulk in the face. And I was like, I have to post this on Facebook. This is the best comic book page I've seen in years. So yeah, it was great. And then he did Exiles, which I also loved. And I want to say there was one more. And then it was like those books didn't go anywhere, but he was doing well enough that they gave him, I believe, Ms. Marvel first, and then Miles Morales shortly thereafter. If I'm wrong, just it's the other way around. But and those were books that I had read since their beginning. I've read the Comic Con Ms. Marvel from the beginning. That's probably now since I'm about to get rid of my Ultimate Fallout number 5 or 4, whatever number it is. I think my most valuable comic is probably Ms. Marvel number 1, which has the first appearance of Comic Con. And from my cold dead hands, I'm really going to try to hold on to that one because I don't like selling any of them, much less the ones that I really like. But it was the same with Miles Morales, even though I am selling his first appearance. I've been reading that character since the beginning, and I had always really liked him. And now, I don't want to sound critical of Saladin Ahmed's talents, but the books kind of sucked. They were just kind of boring. And so I dropped them after a while. Even like when Carmen Carnero drew an arc of Miles Morales not that long ago, and she's one of my absolute favorite like new artists. And still didn't really think even her work wasn't that great in it. And the conclusion I am forced to reach with absolutely no evidence to back it up is editorial interference. Because I've read Saladin Ahmed's work. I know the guy's really good at writing. But now that he's writing these two very much flagship characters, I mean, they're new versions of old characters, but they're very much, Marvel's really banking on characters like Miles Morales and Kamala Khan to bring them into the mid 20th century by having people of color. But and they're also extremely popular. I think largely because of that. Because they're not just the same boring, white guy. But they're I feel like editorials is too protective. a long, long time ago, I emailed the comic book writer Daniel Way. I guess this would have been in late aughts, early teens, and I raved at him about his Deadpool run, which I still highly recommend if you haven't read his Deadpool. It's so good. And there was an issue in particular, or a couple issues in particular, that had tons of Misfits references, and I was like, dude, I love the Misfits, one of my favorite bands. And they were deep cut references. They were not casual fan references. They were ones that you had to know all their songs to know. So I wrote something. I was like, dude, I'm so glad a Misfits fan is writing this book. And he was like, yeah, I had a few other, and he told me what other kind of jokes or like references like that. And he said editorial made him take them out. And he was like, he tried to explain that it was a reference, and they were like, nah. And so that, and it didn't. I mean, I think I even said, I replied to him and I said that sucks, but I'm also not that surprised. Like that sounds like business as usual over there at the House of Ideas with their new characters, Ms. Marvel and Spider Man. So I can only assume, in the same way that they threw Black Bolt in exile to Saladin Ahmed because he was new and untested, they were like, do whatever you want. Nobody gives a shit. But then when they were like, oh, wow, this kid's really turning in some good work, kid. He might be my age for all I know. Well, let's give him the flagship books. Let's give him the biggins. And then they were in his ass the whole time, is all I can think of. Can't do this, don't do that. You can't have them do this and that and the other thing. Like I say, it's largely speculation on my part, but it's pretty well educated. I mean, there's few things I know better than all this sort of bullshit. So you can go ahead and take my word for it. And if I'm wrong, I'll take it all back. But that's just my theory. So that brings me around to this funny book here. This is Saladin Ahmed's first creator-owned work for Image. And if you're not familiar with that particular phrase, it just means what it says. The creator can do whatever the fuck they want to do with their book. So they can. I mean, I think Image probably has some sort of QC going, but yeah, Image publishes stuff. They don't hew to the comics code. There's swearing. There's sex. I mean, I don't think they've ever done like a full-on stroke book. No, yes, they have. It was called The Savage Dragon. That's another story altogether. So now that not only is Saladin Ahmed writing a book that Marvel Editorial doesn't care about, Marvel Editorial doesn't even have a say in it. So I am very excited for this, and I hope I'm not building it up too much for myself. I think I've done a lot of that lately. Also this week, Warlock Rebirth #1. This week's nostalgia book. Well, I guess Packless is kind of making me nostalgic for 2016. Something happened in 2016 that I really, it was really a drag. Oh, well, I'll think of it later. Adam Warlock, if you're not familiar, you soon will be, because he's probably going to be featured largely in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in theaters May 5th, if I'm not mistaken, or May 6th. I will likely go. May 5th. I've always hated going to opening weekend movies because not only does it tend to be more crowded, it's also, if the movie sucks, they're still going to make another one if enough people went and saw it the first weekend. So even if it tanks the next weekend, they're probably still going to make another one. And I don't want to be a party to like another Paul Blart or something like that, No offense to the great Kevin James. But Warlock is also one of my favorite characters since I'm a little kid. When I was 14 years of age, they gave him his own book called Warlock and the Infinity Watch, which also featured Drax the Destroyer, but my preferred version of Drax the Destroyer. The Drax the Destroyer that you see in the movies and also in the comics of the last 15 years or so. Fun character. I love Dave Bautista. Not nearly as fun as the previous one. The original Drax the Destroyer was this big monster, like even bigger than the Drax that is now. He wore this ridiculous purple and green outfit with a cape and like a skull in the middle of his forehead. And his whole thing was he was there to kill Thanos because Thanos killed his family, which never ever comes up in the fucking. They never mention in the movie, and I think they probably made it canon now. But his name used to be Arthur Miller Earth or something, and he was a saxophone player. I don't even think they've told us that he's human in the movies. I don't think they've ever really talked about his background. But I haven't seen every goddamn second of the MCU. He was on the Infinity Watch. Gamora also was, and Pip the Troll, who had a cameo in the end of Eternals, voiced by Patton Oswalt, who now has two characters in the MCU. 3 or 4 if you count the fact that he plays a set of like twins or triplets in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Are you getting all this? Anyway, I love that book. I never really read a lot of Jim Starlin's work. And that's Jim Starlin created Adam Warlock, as he did Thanos and a lot of these other characters from Guardians. Drax, I believe, was his also. But that was my first, because that was around the time of, I want to say, Infinity War. Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War, Infinity Crusade. So yeah, I think after Infinity War, which I loved, and the comic Infinity War was much different than the movie. But I really enjoyed it, except for the poopy parts. But yeah, Warlock and the Infinity Watch spun out of that. So not only did I love that as a kid, but then I kind of lost. Like I loved Silver Surfer back then too. Then when I kind of fell out of superheroes and then came back into them, it was a while. Like I didn't buy the Guardians of the Galaxy series that the movies were based on. That was coming out when I was buying comics. But it had been so long since I read any of that cosmic stuff. And the cosmic stuff is like not unlike in the MCU. It's very separate from the rest of the Marvel universe because most of that happens on Earth. All the stuff that happens out in space, it's like a whole different. Like they very rarely come back into contact with your regular Earth superheroes. But then, and I guess this would have been after the first Guardians movie came out. Yeah, this is like in 2015. I went through a real bad bout of depression. It was very bad, and the only good thing to come out of it was that I spent every spare moment of my time in my room reading comics, and I wasn't working at the shop for that 1 year, but I was making enough money to just buy. I bought all this Jim Starlin stuff, like from the beginning, from the earliest Thanos and Adam Warlock appearances, all the way up through Warlock and the Infinity Watch, which I don't think I actually finished, but I came very close, and I could probably still find those trades. It won't be that hard. Just stacks of trades, I just burn through them, and burn through them. I was in bed from 4 a.m. until 10 p.m. reading. But I was like, it sucked. I wanted to kill myself, and the only thing that was stopping me was Jim Starlin comics. But reading them all over again, not only did they make me just feel better in the moment, but I was like, fuck, this shit is so good. Now, having said all that, Jim Starlin has nothing to do with this book. Jim Starlin is probably not going to be working at Marvel Comics ever again, from what I understand. He's always had a bit of a contentious relationship, to say the very least. But according to the Tom Brevoort's weekly newsletter, somebody asked him about Starlin, and he said, "Yeah, I don't think Jim's coming back." It sounded pretty fun. He might have even said that Starlin said some stuff that he was not going to be able to walk back. So, and I got the impression that he had done that before, that he'd stormed out, "You'll never see me again," and then he was back. But I think he's gone now. But this is written by Ron Mars and drawn by Ron Lim, who were the creative team on the Silver Surfer in the 90s when I was a kid. So, this is like the thing about these stupid movies, which it doesn't really bother me, but I definitely notice it. It's definitely noticeable to me, is that they will bring in, and especially now, because they're like, Jesus Christ, how many characters have we used? We got to get Master Pandemonium. What? We used him for MODOK? Okay, check. Who else do we have? Like, they're using so many characters that they just don't have a whole lot to choose from. Adam Warlock's one that I say me, been waiting for a while. And I don't really care what the movie turns out like, but if it's going to make another... It's the same thing when they gave Namor the Submariner a miniseries right around when this last Black Panther movie came out. And I was like, cool. Because the Namor in the Black Panther movie wasn't anything like in the comics, really. It wasn't bad, but I was like, I'd rather just read this book. So at least they do that. Case in point, I'll come to that, though. Excuse me, I have a text message. Oh, it's America saying, "Get out of my face with this YouTube bullshit." I've just been informed that my infant son had a giant shit, so I want to put everyone's mind at ease out there. Kid is not constipated. All right. Yeah, last week was all nostalgia books, wasn't it? Jeez Louise. All right, so first up was Plan 59 from Outer Space. This was fun, and it was about what I expected. The thing is, and this is a very fine line for me to walk because I really like to support smaller independent artists. I really like uh, when things not all they don't. Every Marvel and DC book looks exactly the same. That's how I want it, but I want other things, you know. And it's also always kind of fitting whenever there's a Plan 9 comic that it's kind of low budge. Like the fact, because like this is very well made, but it's also extremely low budge. Um, that's an industry term for low budget. I'm in the industry. I'm a mason. Uh, I've there's been several Plan 9 comics, and they're all like that, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. But in my heart of hearts, what I would really love to see, it doesn't even have to be a comic. It could be a TV show or a movie or something like that. I want to see a full on, non ironic, that's the most important thing, non ironic version of Plan 9 with like a budget and real actors. And I want to see somebody really try to do that story. That would be fun to me. This book takes it kind of like seriously, but there's still a lot of wink, like, because it's a goofy cult movie that, mostly is watched to be made fun of. I get that. I'm fine with that, but what I wouldn't give this is close though. This comes close, and so I'm looking forward to reading more of that. I hope there's another issue because a lot of the times too with these very very small press publishers, they do one and then you never hear from them again. Return of the Jedi Ewoks. This wasn't good. It just wasn't good. You know what? I was thinking this is a good comparison. I don't know how into the Halloween franchise you might be, but I've seen every single one except for the sequel to H2O. I don't think I ever saw that. But other than that, oh, and I never saw the second Rob Zombie Halloween. But I still do want to see it because I really like the first one. But I've seen that's one of the few like slasher franchises that I've seen all of. I've only seen like a couple Nightmare on Elm Streets. I've only seen a couple Friday the 13th. Shit, I might have only ever seen the first one. But Halloween, for whatever reason, I've seen most of them, even the shitty mid '80s ones. The 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 most recent Halloween movie, which Halloween Ends, I guess it was called. Not a bad movie. I had a good time, but they tried to do something. I don't want to spoil anything, but they took a big swing. They really tried to do something different with that kind of a story, which God bless their hearts. Because sure, I'm here for the regular old slasher movie stuff, but if you want to try to give me something I haven't seen before, well, I'm all fucking eyes and ears. Big swing didn't pull it off. I was like, hats off to trying this. It's just not working. And this is kind of similar. This was almost turned into like an anthology book itself. Alyssa Wong, who is a great writer, she's writing Deadpool now. She's been writing Doctor Aphra, which I'm way behind on, but I do still like that book, and I like her on that book. She's also writing the current Iron Fist, which I don't know if that's ended. I don't remember the last issue I read, but it's definitely been a while. So I don't remember if it ended or if it got canceled or what. But and I love the Ewoks too. You guys remember my big old rant about the Ewoks last week? If you haven't, you know, tried to drink it out of your system, I don't know what I'm talking about. So and it was also it was kind of a big swing in that there's no dialogue. It was all it's three Ewoks telling three different stories around a campfire. And honestly, I mean the art was fine, although it was a little more like there was definitely one story that was harkening after the cartoon, the Ewoks cartoon of the '80s, which I believe was a Saturday morning thing, which I barely remember, even though I definitely would have watched it if it were on. Or maybe not. It might have been like late '80s, early '90s, and I might have felt I was a little too old for that sort of thing. Well, that doesn't sound like me. um, But yeah, I remember there was at least one of these stories where I got to the end of it and I go, what the fuck happened? And I went back and read it again and I was still like, I'm not, I don't. Eh. That's the thing though with these. So that's what I mean though, bringing up Halloween stuff. Big swing, eh, can't win them all. Hats off though for the swing. That's all I'm trying to say. This was a perfect. This was great. This was not only all drawn by Stan Sakai, but written by Stan Sakai as well. And I guess I feel like it's been a minute since his regular monthly Usagi Yojimbo series has come out. So I feel like maybe this is what he's been doing in the meanwhile. And I'm looking forward to the regular monthly series again, but it needn't rush. I can't believe I'm actually going to do another 40 minutes. I told myself this morning, I was like, you should do half that. Then again, I also said to myself, you don't do a fucking podcast anymore. This is it. Go on at length. Who gives a shit? The now like 12 views I get on these, every week. Oh, there might be 9 instead. Oh no. Anyway, I told a very cute story that I would like to repeat for this broadcast. Uh, because I was talking about how Stan Sakai is doing all the work on this, and I kind of think that's better because Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, who created the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in 1984, don't really do a lot of stuff. Kevin Eastman does do these days. He'll do a lot of covers. He does a lot of like variant covers, and he also does a lot of press. He's around a lot, and I'm pretty sure he lives in San Diego because I used to see him all the goddamn time. Peter Laird became a recluse. He started the Zarek Foundation, which was like a $10,000 grant that he would give out yearly to a comic book project that it was like a contest they would run. Daniel Way, who I mentioned, was an early winner of a Zarek award, and he doesn't do it anymore. It's kind of a bummer, but he did it for a long time, and I was like, thank God. That's the thing about Eastman and Laird, and like I mentioned last week, how they got Stan Sakai well paid in the early '90s. They're very supportive of artists and of comic book artists in particular. But Peter Laird, I don't think likes attention, so he doesn't really do anything. Kevin Eastman, on the other hand, though, very personable, very friendly. So I used to work at a comedy club in San Diego, California, and one of my jobs, and my favorite job, in fact, was I had to get up at the crack of dawn every Friday morning, go downtown and pick up the headliner of the weekend and take them to various local uh, radio and TV stations. And I didn't even have to drive; they hired a driver. The club did. I was just there to kind of facilitate things, to be the go-between. And so, therefore, I had to go between. I don't know if any of you are in showbiz, but you get some strange requests at times. Nothing super weird. And and but it was just fun. It was fun hanging out with headliners, guys who were like way ahead of me in comedy and could pick their brains, or that I was just fans of in general. And one weekend, it was a weekend that I was working with a guy too, so it was like more time I got to spend with Adam Ray. I don't know if you're familiar with the stand-up comedian Adam Ray. He's very, very funny man, very sweet boy. He was recently on Welcome to Flatch as Barb Flatch's ex-husband. He was really good. He was in an episode of Hacks in season 1. Incredibly good. He played a real piece of shit stand-up, and it was even more ironic to me because I knew what a sweet boy he is. We went to the local Fox affiliate, and Kevin Eastman was there, and Adam Ray hit the roof, and I was like, "Yeah, who doesn't like to see Kevin Eastman somewhere?" But at that point, I'd already seen him there a couple, 3 times. I was there once with Kevin Nealon, not to brag, and they knew each other, I think, from something else. And Kevin Nealon drew a picture of Kevin Eastman in front of me, and I was like, "This is a weird job, but it's great." Uh, so yeah, and at the time, so Adam just going crazy, and Adam, I want to say, is like a few years younger than me, and I was 12 when the Ninja Turtles hit, so that means Adam Ray was probably 8 or 9, and that means it hit him even harder than it did me. So when he saw Kevin Eastman, his jaw hit the floor, and Kevin Eastman's very nice. Oh, nice to meet you. Blah blah blah. And then Adam was like, "I've got this I really would love to have you on my podcast. Do you have like I don't remember what it was. He didn't have, or that was what it was. Adam Ray had to go, or Kevin Eastman had to go in front of the camera. Yeah, that's what it was. He was going to exchange information, but they're like, Kevin, we need you. So I go, well, yeah, we'll see him on the way out. But then right before, so then Kevin Eastman did his segment, and then right before Adam went up to do his, he pulls me aside. He's like, "You need to get Kevin Eastman. Like, I need to have him on my podcast." And I was like, "Honey, there is nothing I would love more than to have Kevin Eastman on your podcast, and I will do everything in my power." Which I think consisted of me walking in and go, "Hey, Kevin, do you have a card I can give to Adam?" And, oh yeah, here you go. But it meant so much to him, and I was like, wow, what is that? It was so nice to see. It was just nice to see somebody excited to meet a hero. You know what I mean? And then to, get to even to get to kind of get to be a part of it. Now I have the story. All right, that was all I wanted to say about that. This was something I didn't discuss last week, but I read this week, and it was really fucking good. The thing I have always, like, I was talking about with Guardian. Was I talking about Guardians? Yes, I was, because I was talking about Warlock. The original Guardians of the Galaxy, you don't know. I would wager to guess. You don't know who those characters are at all. If you didn't blink at the end of the second movie, you might have caught a sight of some of them. And I think even Stallone had a uncredited cameo as Charlie 27. But those characters haven't been around. Those characters in Marvel continuity are from the 30th century or something like that. Guardians of the Galaxy was begun in the 70s, and they never had their own title. It was in a test book, Marvel Premiere, one of those. Back in the day, they had these books they called test books. Um, DC had like first issue special, and Marvel had Marvel Premiere. They had a few, so it was basically books where they would only come out every other month, and they would try new shit. They would throw new characters, new teams, new concepts, or whatever. See what stuck. You know, sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. I believe Son of Satan came out of Marvel Premiere. Ghost Rider came out of Marvel Premiere, and I want to say the Guardians of the Galaxy also did too. And then, like 15 years later, when I was a kid, they got their own monthly series drawn by Jim Valentino, who was kind of hot shit at the time. But I just couldn't get into it. It was very, because it was so far in the future. It was basically their Legion of Superheroes, but it wasn't very connected to the current stuff, so I didn't really bother. And then, like I said, when 2008, when Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning, who created the team that you know are familiar with from the movies, for Guardians, like they relaunched it in 2008 with characters from the current Marvel universe like Star Lord and Rocket Raccoon. Although Rocket Raccoon and Groot were very C and D list back then. Rocket Raccoon had made his first appearance in an issue of the Hulk, written by Bill Mantlo, and then he had a 4-issue miniseries, and then every now and again he might be a punchline in something, but he never really been until Abnett and Lanning. Same with Groot. Groot was not unlike how he is now, kind of a punchline. Groot had appeared back in the 50s when they were just doing monster comics, giant monster comics, like Steve Ditko's thing. He did a lot of those. So they had a lot of goofy names like Goom, Son of Gore, and stuff like that. And Groot was one of them. And he was like a big monster tree. Right. He wasn't nice, friendly Groot. Like he became breakdancing and shit like that. But they were kind of, they weren't, 1,000 years in the future. But then, uh, I did eventually start. I think it was after Abnett and Lanning, and I think right around when the first movie came out, they had a monthly again. And I started reading it. I was like, oh yeah, I love this stuff. This is great. But then it kind of got burnt out, and I kind of stopped reading Guardians for a while. So when they started running ads for this one, I was like, well, it looks like a Western, so yes. And it was. And it's great. So this is written by, and I had to look at their names this morning. I had to do it again. Thrill as he looks up stuff. Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing, who are a fairly new to Marvel writing team, who are currently writing Captain America, Symbol of, or is it Sentinel? Sentinel of Liberty. Symbol of something or other. Freedom? That's the Falcon one. But they're writing the Steve Rogers one. And it's good. So I was like, yeah. And Kev Walker, who most recently drew the first arc of the Predator series written by Ed Brisson. Incredible art. And so, yeah, I don't want to spoil anything, but it's all like, it's very Western themed. It's still science fiction. It still takes place on different planets and stuff. but it's got this whole, like, I mean, Star Lord's basically Clint Eastwood in Good, Bad, and the Ugly here. Groot seems to be, oddly enough, what I was just saying, seems to be the villain in this, but they haven't yet explained how that came about. So, and also Rocket doesn't seem to be in this yet either. But you got Nebula, who is now, she was always the villain before, but now she's part of the team. Mantis, Gamora, and that's Drax back there. So that's all. Good. I made it even longer this time. Watch now. Not only is there no sound when my computer blows up, it would really be for the best.